what questions does an SBOM answer? So I have this SBOM document now. Now, what do I do with it?
Yeah, this is also a surprisingly popular question because if you think about the SBOM outside of the realm of just meeting the compliance checkbox in order to transact in a particular geography, for example, an SBOM really informs many use cases. A lot of them revolve around the common topic of risk management. They help various teams make decisions about procurement or also continuous operation of software in the context of vulnerability remediation or incident response. But before I continue, Russ, in your experience, like what answers can an SBOM provide?
Um, Thanks, Tomas. I think an SBOM can answer, and it's not often used for this. I think we're seeing some growth in it, though. So an SBOM can often answer license compliance questions. So there still isn't broad consensus on whether to include license data in SBOMs or not. And sometimes it comes down to who you're talking to. So perhaps license compliance might appear to be less important if you were in a security role. That said, those that disagree with license compliance being part of an SBOM may still be forced to produce this data if it becomes a requirement from their customer. So this is why we still recommend having the metadata that Tomas spoke about earlier associated with your cataloged open source use. So if you need it for SBOM, you already have it. If you don't, then at least you have it for other needs, such as license compliance. An SBOM can also help answer what's in your software. So it's critical to understand your inventory. Before we get into the specifics, let's talk a little bit about knowing what's in your software and your software inventory, because inventory is critical for many reasons. And maybe this also ties in with the trust and transparency aspect as well. So cataloging, which we've mentioned already, so knowing what software you're using. It's important to note where that software is used. So in which products, to which customers, clients, maybe how it was used, perhaps as a standalone library, which might be important to know from a license compliance perspective. When it was used, so in which releases and in which months and years, because you may need to upgrade a version at some point. And when you do, it would be good to know when that change was breakpointed. So basically, without an inventory, you don't know what you have or what you may not have. For example, log4shell. You might not know where something was used or how it was used. So how does that relate to SBOMs? So SBOMs enable trust and transparency. But to do that, you need to be able to identify your use of software and then be able to report on it, like in an SBOM. So you can't do anything about the open source you're not aware of. So you can't comply with it, you can't secure it, and you certainly won't be able to accurately report on it. If you know your code and have the kind of inventory data or catalog that I just spoke about, then putting together that SBOM becomes that much easier. So many organizations are often stuck at, how do I know what I'm using? So, I mean, don't get me wrong, if you have a customer requirement to produce an SBOM, I'm not saying to go build a catalog first. Definitely address your immediate need, but a longer term goal should be to work towards a full catalog of what's being used, how it's being used, and where it's being used. Tomas, any other use cases?
I forgot to unmute myself. No, I think the key piece that you mentioned, you kept going back to, is so important. This aspect of building a catalog and really understanding what's in the software that you buy or that you build or that you're running in your environment for various reasons. License compliance being one of them, absolutely, since it informs many go no go decisions on whether or not software can be used. But also dependency health is one. The information in an SBOM can help developers really understand the components in use in an application. It gives them visibility into dependencies that might be out of date or potentially unsupported, which introduces a maintainability risk. Like an SBOM can definitely be a source of insight for informing decisions on whether or not these components are viable for longer term use, as well as vulnerability management and incident response. This is the one we hear about a lot. these days. Like an SBOM can inform decisions around ongoing operations of software for not only the detection and the identification of vulnerabilities, but also for allowing better triage and remediation planning. In the sense that if you have an SBOM for a particular piece of software, you know how that software is deployed. What is critical severity according to the National Vulnerability Database might not necessarily be critical severity for your environment because of the way your software is deployed, other controls you have in place, other network restrictions, or just overall the results of a threat model that you ran in your environment. The data of your SBOM can inform whether or not this is something that needs to be actioned. Beyond understanding the impact of a vulnerability, there's also the aspect of support. Like an SBOM, particularly having that catalog with the provenance metadata, can help teams understand who they need to reach out to or who they rely on for support of a particular vulnerability. Is it an open source vulnerability, or is it a vulnerability in a commercial component? The SBOM can likely point teams at who they need to reach out to in order to, request remediation or mitigation assistance. An SBOM can also help in crisis communications. If you, at the time of shipping your software, produced an SBOM and there were no vulnerabilities associated with that, with any of the components in your software, and suddenly there is, because you have that SBOM, you now know, okay, like I have this component, a new vulnerability was disclosed for it. Who's running this version of my software? I need to reach out to them and let them know that there's a vulnerability in the software, as well as what actions are going to come from it. So there's an interesting aspect to crisis communications among partners, affected organizations, and customers during, but also following an incident. All in all, these are all answers around trust. Like what's in an SBOM can provide confidence in the security, the licensing, as well as the dependency health of all your products. And as a vendor, that can help you demonstrate to the people you supply to that what's in your software and you're acting in their best interest. All in all this information we're talking about is really part of a foundation. Like the SBOMs themselves don't tell you how to act. The SBOMs provide the foundation for the answers and around which you can build processes. So what we want to do is really think about, you think you alluded to this, what is the question that you want to answer with an SBOM, and then kind of figure out what information needs to be in the SBOM in order to better answer that question. So imagine a fantastic scenario. You mentioned Log4j. Imagine when Log4Shell or even Heartbleed were disclosed. Like if there was a complete map because we had SBOMs from multiple sources that really helped understand the dependencies and their widespread impact, we would have been able to really understand the impact of such a vulnerability much faster, instead of still finding out to these days that there are systems, embedded devices, and just overall hosts out there that are still running vulnerable versions of OpenSSL. An SBOM could have helped provide insight into the widespread impact of such a vulnerability.
Your trusted